Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly AgWeather update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. I'm recording this on Sunday evening, and it's been a fascinating weekend to watch this low that came out of Louisiana and went right over the top of North Carolina here on Sunday. And why it's been fascinating is because it's been a challenging forecast to figure out exactly where the ice and the snow was going to be all along. The issue here was that there's not a deep pool of cold air, not a lot of cold air damming, and so a lot of this was just elevation dependent. And certainly as it came right over the spine of the Appalachian Mountains, there are places that got quite a bit of ice and some snow. But outside of that, most of this was a rainfall event. So there's some of the newest data right there that just came in. We're going to continue to watch this, but by the time a lot of you watch the video tomorrow morning, this will be offshore and be kind of a done deal here. Now, thinking about just watching it, this is just kind of fascinating. My radar algorithm here will color code when we make this flip over to some snow. And again, this event right in through this area. And again, the radar does not do a good job of coverage on the mountains simply because of their elevation. But there was, of course, the conversion over to snow. And I was watching the actual observations because we did have winter weather advisories up in Virginia, West Virginia, and still, as of Sunday evening, winter storm warning. Just a few counties right in through here with a winter storm watch to the south. Now, this storm system did put down quite a bit of precipitation. In fact, I'm going to go take a quick look at that. Last 72 hours of total precip. And there you go. You can kind of see that this system through, about 5:30 here on Sunday, just before the Super Bowl started, we could see that this system did put down quite a bit of heavy precipitation. A lot of this area in through here, well above an inch in terms of total accumulated precipitation. But I was looking at the actual observations. I always find these fascinating to look closely at. It's a mess, right? The first time you see it, like, oh my gosh. But the symbols tell you what's going on. So here's rain, 35 in rain. I mean, this is so cold of a rain event. 37 in rain and some snow with quarter-mile visibility as you get up here into parts of Virginia. So tough forecast, and but an important one. And the reason why it was important is ultimately because of what it's going to be doing to maps like this. All right. It's that time of year, here we are in mid-February, where all of our focus is, what is March going to hold in terms of temperatures? What's our soil moisture going to look like? What are we going to start this growing season off with? And overall, I have a very positive message for the Carolinas, even into Virginia, despite the fact that the farther north you go into Virginia, near the D.C. area, since the beginning of this year, has actually been quite dry. In fact, right around the D.C. area, it's right up there, the fourth driest start to any year on record. This, if you slide south, though, because of the recent precipitation events, it's been quite wet. Now, it'll be a while before this begins to show up on the drought monitor, but this is the latest view of the drought monitor. And what we've got here, again, this one was released last week, is we've continued to see the drought area shrink. That was there from the fall in this area, but this map really tells you where it's still embedded. North to south throughout the plains, and even though we've seen major improvement in the west, it's still there. That drought is still lingering there due to longer-term precipitation deficits throughout the western United States. Now, in the central U.S., this is the top story for us, okay? So I'm, of course, from Illinois. We look at the whole of the corn and soybean belt, this whole area. You go down 100 centimeters, that's 40 inches, and we still have the remnants of last fall's drought. It's been extremely wet in the Mid-South, along the Gulf Coast, and we've now seen quite a bit of precip move through North Carolina. The long-standing drought issues there are done. It's this area and through here, there's still substantial soil moisture deficit. Now, spring can undo all of this, and that's what we have to just wait and see. We can attempt to predict it, but to be honest, it's going to be a day-by-day observation of what things look like before we begin what we just generally call thunderstorm season, when we stop seeing these big lows that come across the country and we start to open up the atmosphere to more individual convective events. But what we've seen in North Carolina this winter has been kind of redemptive of some of the issues that I was concerned about, primarily with lack of good precip. We had drought along the east, and that has since been kind of relieved. Now, what do the next 10 days hold? Let's shrink that up so we can see it. Very active, okay? We're just going to continue to see a pattern that rips through the country like this. That's it. That arrow tells you what to expect for the next 10 plus days. And what it's doing is it's running up over the top of a big subtropical ridge. We've been talking about that for a while. And the flow's still pretty weak and split in the west. So systems go around the split, dive through the mountains, and eject. Now, they tend to come right across the Midwest. And you know what that means. As these systems lift, they drop fronts through us. And that's why we don't see the really heavy precip, because we have yet to get this year a big East Coast cyclone. And you say, why no big East Coast cyclones? Well, we've had a really dominant, throughout the second part of winter here, dominant ridge over the southeast. That's wrong. We wouldn't want that. We've not been able to get a flow to kind of come over a large ridge like this and dive into a trough here, where there's still high pressure sitting up in this area. Okay, I guess I should draw that the other way. That's the direction high pressure cells sit. That scenario would be perfect to get a big East Coast cyclone. And that's not been the way this atmosphere's been set up. And over the next 10 days, we have moisture coming in, but it's not from the big coastal cyclones. The temperature pattern over the next 10 days is quite mild as well. We're going to see more mild days than colder days. And but there are some moving pieces we need to be speaking about to try to figure out if March potentially has that risk of a frost, okay, a late frost. So let's dig into it. First thing I'm going to show you is this animation. This goes back to November, and it's playing right now through the month of December. That's our La Nina right here. Now, as we get into January, watch how quickly it begins to fade. And now we are at the beginning of February, and this La Nina is falling to pieces pretty quickly right in front of us. So very strong last November, and now it's beginning to break up. Got some new data out, just came in last week, looking at the probability of having in blue La Nina, in the gray neutral, and in the red El Nino. We continue to see throughout spring and summer the most likely scenario is going to be neutral conditions. The timing of when an El Nino could return is going to be challenging, but more likely to be a late summer or fall. We'll begin to see El Nino, taking kind of control over the pattern. And yes, it's been at least, 2019 was the last time we really kind of talked about an El Nino-like pattern. So this is a pretty significant shift. And you say, well, what does that mean for us? Well, transition years, if you look at all of them and stitch them together, they don't give you a strong signal. You'll have some analogs that look one way and others that look another way. So therefore, we put them all together into a composite, and they give you pretty close to average information. What I can say is that we do build in an El Nino event by late summer, early fall that could possibly reduce the risk of a hurricane. What I'm concerned about is what El Nino does to the movement position of the Bermuda High. And that's something we're going to be talking about over the coming weeks and even months before we get there. So I just want you to know now more evidence that this La Nina is going to start to fade. And here's probably the most conclusive evidence. And you're probably going, well, what is this? This is not La Nina. I think that's what's most important. You know that for the last, I don't know how many months, we've been talking about all the deep blues and greens that are here and the reds that are over there, and they just collide in this area. That's gone. And this is just showing that there's no longer this dominant La Nina signal, and guess what's taking over? The MJO. This is the most I have seen it move in a while. Earlier this month, it was in phase 3. It then quickly skipped through phases 4 and 5. It's today here on Sunday in phase 6. It's expected to go to phase 7 and phase 8. And some of the models want to leave it over here in the West Pacific. And you say, well, significance. Tell me what that means, Eric. Well, this is what it means. We're going to spend some time here in the this next week in phase 7. And more than likely, phase 7 will continue to have an influence going into toward the end of February as well. Now, why do I care about it? It tends to give us that big blocking ridge and split flow here around the west. Systems come curling in, like I said, and guess what? There's that subtropical ridge. So on average, if the MJO is the most dominant tropical teleconnection, we get what I just described to you now and what I described to you earlier. Now, should we make a move to where the MJO gets as far as it typically extends into the Pacific or resets back into the Indian Ocean by Africa, that's a whole different look. And it looks something like this. Now, this could be very poorly timed. So I need to be really careful in how I describe this, because right now, none of this is set in stone. But what it could do is extend the Pacific jet, come over weak ridging in the west, and then dive. And now do you see what you end up getting? A large ridge here, troughs over the southeast. This could give us a very active march along the east coast. Now, that continues to eat away at any sort of risk about drought, but this makes things very muddy and mucky and wet. And there's consequences to that as well, despite what I consider benefits of really reducing our risk of early season drought development. So that right there might be the most important factor going forward in our forecast to watch. Does the MJO have the grip on the patterns such that we start to deliver March systems that roll up the East Coast, all built on this trough? And this is a part of the negative North Atlantic oscillation. You might hear about that. This may be a part of the change in the Arctic oscillation, but a lot of what ifs. And the biggest what if is happening above all of this, because in the stratosphere over this week, we're going to see a pretty large stratospheric vortex, polar vortex displacement. The center of it could move right over the top of Scandinavia. Now remember, this is in the stratosphere, so it has to connect with the troposphere, which is the layer we live in, to deliver any sort of a punch, a big shot at colder air. But anytime we see the polar vortex being weakened or disrupted or moved, our ears perk up. And what we're looking at right now is that the stratospheric winds had been so strong all season, and then they did this, and now they're doing that. And that's weakening. And so we just look at it and we say, okay, we need to be prepared for the potential, not now, but probably 15 to 21 days from now, to have this link up with the troposphere and give us a big shot at cold air. Now, again, very speculative. I don't even know the placement of where that's going to be. No one does, but we're going to have to watch out for it. Remember, this is not immediate. It's the changes happening in the stratosphere today and this week, but the effect of it could be a long time from now. So let's take a look at what some of those long-range forecasts do look like. This was just released from the Climate Prediction Center. This is their outlook for the last few days of February and the first 10 days of March. They continue to keep that phase 7 MJO look, right? So there's that subtropical ridge keeping things warm. And guess what? Around it, if systems come in and dive and exit, there you go. Where would they dive around? This cold weather right here. So this makes sense based upon what we know right now about how the rest of this month and the start of March is going to start off. The concern is, at some point in March, does the European model actually have the right idea? Because the latest European data suggests that from February 25th to March 25th, there's actually better chances at colder air here. And if it's sitting there, that means it will get let out at times. And I don't like to be thinking about those mid-March frost events or freeze events that can be highly impactful here, in North Carolina. So just as an example, I'm just going to do this real quick. If we just go to my website, agweather.com, I'll just pick Raleigh as an example. Although this past weekend I spent some time in, if I could spell it right, can't talk and type. Come on, Eric. There we go. Raleigh. I spent some time in Charlotte, mainly in the airport, but I was there. But if you come over to the website, slide down here, you can get this year-to-date GDDs. Click on that. So this is what I'm concerned about. You see, normally in Raleigh, of course, in the center part of the state, the last frost of the year is on average around March 29th to April 1st. We have had them later, but that's the average. What I just get worried about is this outlook possibly suggests that we could get a good shot at some colder air in March. And I just want this rapid start to the growing season, so we start packing in them GDDs, those GDDs pretty quickly here. So let's go back here and just a quick reminder. That pattern is active with wet, but chances of cold air coming back in March. Let's just leave it at that and monitor the situation. Nothing is set in stone at this point. I do want to show you the latest spring outlook from the NMME, the National Multi-Model Ensemble. So we looked last week at the European. This was the newest that's been released. It's trying to keep the driest conditions tucked away under the ridge down here in the Gulf. So that's not a strong signal for us to be drier. And for the most part, even though there's a shot at potentially cold March, we do see April and May offsetting. So probably a quick accumulation of early season heat based upon the models. And interestingly enough, just thinking about this, let's think about temperature and precipitation in March, April, and May. I want to give you some of the longer term stats. So specifically for North Carolina, March, April, May, you can see precipitation varies widely, but on average, we're over the last 42 years, I went back and detrended since 1980, there's a slight upward trend in total precipitation in March, April, May, but the variability by far outweighs the trend here. Let's flip this over and look at maximum temperatures. So if I click on that and plot it, what we're going to see here is this is the maximum temperature trend. In other words, is there any sort of a change in the spring temperatures? And we can actually see that on average, we're about 1.5 degrees, almost 2 degrees warmer than normal over the last 40 years. That's the average. It just continues to go up. And we say, well, what about those overnight lows? Because that'll tell me something about the frost. And what I can see here is that March, April, and May, same story. We're up significantly, almost a full degree per decade during that time period. So spring historically has been coming earlier, and more often than not, we've had near normal precip. looking at the historical averages. So that's what we have to consider here when I say, well, there's this risk of cold in March, but the reality of it is those longer term trends need to be considered. Okay? From here, let's now show you the big picture. The big picture in the next 10 to 15 days is we don't have the right setup to get us any deep cold air. You say, well, what are you looking for, Eric? I'm looking for this. This is the jet stream. See how it's diving here and then running up like that? There's this large subtropical ridge that sits here. So as I play, this is through Wednesday of this week. We're quite concerned about the risk for some strong to severe storms over the south. But then that system lifts. See how they all lift toward the Great Lakes, toward Ontario and Quebec. We just don't see the deep troughs diving into the west. This is shallow. That's not a deep trough. That's a deep trough. You see how that one digs into the west, and then what does it do? It just runs. It runs straight through the lower Mississippi River Valley, and then it just heads north. Nothing cutting in, possibly until we get into the end of this month or the beginning of the next. So let me show you what we got. We're going to start this off 6 a.m. That'd be 7 a.m., West or East Coast time. There's the low that bothered us all weekend, and it's out. And during the beginning of this week through Monday into Tuesday, you saw the system come into the west and move just like this. We still have a lot of good snowpack in through here, and this is adding more to the Colorado Basin as an example here, and much to the Four Corner states. But these systems are lifting north, and as a result, we get weakened fronts coming over. So the front half of this week, relatively dry. All the actions north here. And we're talking about some good snows in the northern plains. But now let's do a multi-model analysis to see where things go from here. When's our next big chance at precip? So we've got here the GFS on the left and the European on the right. We got these queued up for Monday evening after things have kind of calmed down here. There's the system we just saw and just described. Here's the Euro. And as I play through, that front possibly delivers some scattered showers to us on Wednesday. But again, that big high right there is kind of keeping things away, and it's also pushing the system farther to the north. So then the next system comes out, and this is the one we're kind of worried about for the risk of severe weather here on Wednesday night into Thursday morning over the lower Mississippi River Valley. This one's got a bit more of a potent front behind it, and therefore by the end of this week, we could potentially be picking up quite a bit of precipitation from this system. That one slides through, high pressure, comes right back and sits on top of North Carolina for the weekend. I'll show you the temperatures in a moment. And then notice another system coming out the same location. So you see how that check mark idea, just like that, is what we keep seeing in the models. So let's do a couple of things here. Since I already brought this up, how about I just show you, now this is specifically for Raleigh, but this is on Sunday, so I'm looking at the Euro, the GFS, and a blend. So here's the rain we have today on Sunday, so that's out. Then we go through Tuesday, Wednesday, most of Thursday, dry. The next chance comes in Friday, right here. It's in all three models. Then we go over drier, and then the GFS says, well, maybe another one coming through Tuesday, the 22nd. So you can see very good agreement on the models here. But I'd like to show you, there we go, what it looks like for the rest of the country. Now what's critical about this is where we're seeing the wettest conditions and where we need more precip. All of this coming on the Corn Belt, that is all going to continue to work on this map. Okay, right in through here, and there's snow north of it. If we come down to our neck of the woods, which is here, there we go. Now remember, this fell on Sunday afternoon or Sunday midday, so there's already 0.3, 0.4, 0.5 inches there, more into Virginia. That's the next wave right here. So remember, there's a chance coming through Tuesday into Wednesday, but then the big push is on Thursday into Friday. So pretty good chance of grabbing another inch of rain out of this. So we're not dry overall. Good chance of another inch of rain in that time period. And take a look at this. By day 10, what's the atmosphere doing? Check mark. I don't know why I call it that. It's not even a meteorological term, but it just looks like one to me. And therefore, that subtropical ridge is going to continue to dominate this pattern. So our week 2 follows it. That's where the wettest conditions are going to be. If it's going to be dry, it's going to be pretty far to the south. And the GFS agrees on that. Now let's talk about temperatures. Here was Sunday's temperature, so cold behind that low, all right? But let's get into Monday. Already a rebound, back up to above normal temperatures. This is now Tuesday, Wednesday, very mild, and that big warm sector of that big system that I'm worried about the severe weather threat on the south for Wednesday. And then there's Thursday, still mild. Our chance of getting cold is not going to be until after the second system passes on Friday. So next weekend, remember when the high pressure comes in, that's when we got the colder air coming back in. But every time there's a shot at cold air, it's just that, it's a shot. And you look out there and say, well, what about day 5 through 10? Well, we got a rebound of it pretty quickly. What about day 10 through 15? Could this be partly influenced by the polar vortex split? Sure. But there's still a protective southeastern ridge down here. So we continue to see that influence our pattern. So that's my big ideas I got going right now for North Carolina as we press forward. Watch the subtropical ridge. It is guiding systems to run like this. And that's the mainstay of this pattern through the end of this month. Now I want to give you a quick update on South America. When it comes to the planting of safrinha corn, they are behind the 5-year average by about 14%. All right, so way behind last year though. And a lot of that's been because the soybean crop came out quite slow and there's been some very heavy rain at times. In Mato Grosso, though, the latest data suggests they caught up to the 5-year average on the harvesting of soybeans, but the corn isn't going in very quickly. The issue is to the south of it. This whole region of central Brazil has been extremely wet. So Mato Grosso is here, but I just called last week my coworker that's down here in Goiás, and he says this is the wettest he's ever remembered. And so there could start to show up some quality with the beans as they approach harvest, but yields are huge right now. Argentina's going back over dry. They got a little bit of precip, but they're going back over dry. The big issue here, though, is that it's not going to be hot and dry. They've got quite a bit of cooler air coming in with this drier weather. So that's not going to stress the crops as much as this map may lead on to. So I wanted to give you that update there about South America, just another major crop area we got to watch carefully. I appreciate your attention. I hope this week is a good one for you, and we'll talk again next Monday. Thanks.